Welcome to EVONA Origin Stories, the space podcast where we look to bring you extraordinary leaders from within the sector and their fascinating stories of early life, career, and how they broke into the space industry. Today's guest wanted to be a farmer as a child. As a teenager, she decided to make her farm on Mars, and today that is still her goal.
Taken practical and fascinating steps in realising this dream. She has worked for space startups and taken part in various missions to mimic life off Earth.
She is a creative, inspirational and compassionate leader, often involved in volunteering.
Missions including replicating life on Mars and life on asteroids. This lady has no boundaries in pursuing the seemingly impossible. Ladies and gentlemen, today's guest is Megan Kane.
So thank you so much for joining us, Megan.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Tom. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Us too. Just to jump straight into it, we've just been preparing a few questions really, just to try to bring out your path into the space industry.
So to get started, Megan, I think it'd be really fantastic for you to tell us your story, like a film. So how did you get into the space sector?
So I have a very interesting route into the space sector. I didn't actually start out with that being my goal. My original goal was to be a farmer. I mean, I was always fascinated by space, used to look up at the stars and look at the moon, Mars. I went to space camp as a kid, but my decision to go to Mars started when I was 15, almost 16 years old, when I was going to high school, or secondary school, as you call it in the UK. And we watched this documentary on NASA's planned 2020 mission to Mars. And with that planned 2020 mission to Mars, I saw that footage of what it would be like to be on the red planet. I knew that's where I was going. That's where I wanted to go. One of the other things that fascinated me as a kid was the explorers, people who went to new places and did new things. The explorers who explored America, the South Pole, all that was fascinating to me as a kid. So I thought that would be amazing. When I was almost 16 years old, I made the decision to go to Mars.
So at 16, with your friends, how did they take the news?
So my friends and family, I didn't tell them right away.
Okay.
The only person I told right away was my instructor, who had shown us the presentation at school. Told him, I'm going to be on that flight. And he was very encouraging. He said, if I wasn't on the flight, we were going to watch it together, but he believed I could be on it. Of course, NASA didn't go to Mars in 2020, so I wasn't on the flight, but we did something else in 2020.
Absolutely. So you're at school, you were 16, you made this choice. What were like the life sort of moments do you feel that put you on that path? Because it's obviously quite a specific interest or endeavor.
I'm not entirely sure which things before that put me onto the path. I was always fascinated by space, as I said, but I just knew when I watched that document, I've been working towards it ever since. It's been 20 years. Wow.
I tell you what, the time really does fly, doesn't it?
I started looking at engineering schools as opposed to agricultural schools. I actually ended up at a university studying engineering, ended up switching universities and getting my degree in physics, math, and computer science instead. Long story short, I then worked at an engineering firm for 2 years and was trying to find out what my next step to going to Mars would be. And that's when I joined the Peace Corps. I'm not sure how familiar with the Peace Corps you are, Tom and Chloe.
Not too familiar, if I'm honest.
No, an overview would be great.
Are you familiar with VSO, volunteers serving overseas? I know that that's something that's done in the UK. Peace Corps is the US government's version of VSO. It is where you have professionals providing assistance to developing nations. And in this case, I was providing agriculture extension services in sub-Saharan Africa.
Wow.
We're talking subsistence farming. I lived in a mud hut, carried water on my head, all of it.
Whereabouts were you in Africa?
I was in Malawi, which is formerly Nyasaland, which was part of the British Empire until the 1960s.
Wow. So I guess sustainability really was at the core of your interests.
Yes, sustainability was definitely at the core. And that's where I learned a lot about permaculture, about natural medicine. And it was my first time actually living sustainable agriculture being paramount to, well, survival. It was very interesting to see and be a part of.
How long did you spend out over there?
2 years, 2 months and 2 days. Peace Corps service is 2 years long.
Okay.
Training was 2 months, which wasn't included in the service. And then I stayed 2 extra days because I got like $2,000 off the flight home by doing that. So
Smart move. Okay, amazing. Wow. So you were over there and still in your heart of hearts, you knew that space was where you wanted to go at that point, or?
yes.
Okay.
So I joined the Peace Corps because I wanted to do something meaningful that would help me grow as an individual and give me the time to refocus, recenter on what was next. And it certainly did that. While I was there, actually, I found the International Space University.
Okay, yeah.
And ISU is where I got my graduate degree. Well, my first one, getting ready to start my second one now. And it's also where I met the 3 co-founders of Spire.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah. We know Spire well. Awesome business. Awesome.
Awesome business. I was employee number 7 at Spire. Right after they raised their seed round, I'd emailed Peter a couple of weeks earlier. Then he emailed me one day on a Thursday, would you maybe kind of want to come out and work for us? I'm like, sure. So I started work the next Wednesday in San Francisco. I'd been living in Illinois at the time. That's where my family's from.
Okay.
So when I got the job offer in my email, I didn't respond until 2 p.m. the next day, but my response was, my flight gets in Tuesday at 8 p.m. I'm staying in Palo Alto. When do you want me to start? So that was how I accepted my job offer there.
And what did they say? The next hour, or?
They said, oh, Palo Alto, give us the address. We'll pick you up in the morning.
Awesome. Nice. So you're employee number 7, did you say, in Spire? Okay, wow.
Yep.
Because they're obviously, I think they're like 300 people plus now or so.
I'm not sure how many people exactly, but they are growing and they're growing quickly. They're actually going public, which is exciting.
Yeah, it's
I'm
a
really
SPAC, isn't it?
about that. Yeah.
Is it another SPAC? Yeah. There's been lots of SPACs in the space industry, which is another story in itself. So much growth.
That is totally a different story.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, indeed. Cool. So employee number 7 into Spire. So that must have been a bit of a dream come true, or, well, yeah, and a whirlwind.
It was a bit of a dream come true. Yes. I was so excited to finally have a job in the space industry. I had had an internship previously when I was at ISU working at Johnson Space Center. But this was my first real job in the space sector. And from there, I started as employee number 7, built up a lot of different processes, was in charge of export control, building out all of the operations side of the business at the time. Pretty sure part of the reason I got the job was because they knew I'd run the operations side of a small engineering business before. Just after I got out of university, I worked for 2 years at an engineering firm. And while I was working there, I learned everything you need to know about making sure payroll happens and leasing offices and maintaining them and everything. Yeah, I started out as the office manager. I quickly dropped the office part of my title when I started dealing with federal regulators. I just put manager, even though I was employee number 7, and the only thing I was managing was everything I was doing, not anybody. That came later.
So quite a broad role, I guess. Very much the case when people are going into startups. You have to have lots of different skills and wear lots of different hats, don't you?
Yeah, you do. You do, definitely. And I'm a generalist. I'm not a specialist. So it's always been a challenge for me to figure out, where does a generalist fit in the space industry? Where do I fit in getting things to the point where you need a generalist? Because when you go to another planet and there's like 4, 6, 10, 20, a limited number of people, yeah, generalists are really useful because, I don't know, I can figure out the coffee machine, hotwire a generator, or, ramifications to the business of any particular legal regulation you want, kind of whatever needs done.
Of course. So you went into Spire, and what's next in the story?
So yeah, I was one of the founding directors at Spire UK. It was a whirlwind getting that office up and running. So exciting to help set up the world's most complete and largest CubeSat manufacturing and test facility in the world. It was quite exciting, and I really loved living in Scotland. After I moved back to the States, I was involved in an awesome project with NASA, actually. I don't know if you're familiar with the NASA's Hera project, Chloe.
I am, but I think for the benefit of our listeners, it'd be really great to get a bit more insight.
All right, so Hera stands for Human Exploration Research Analog. It's a NASA experiment using the same facility that was used in Mars Desert Rat, the Deep Space Habitat Program. You can actually look it up online. You can do a virtual tour of it. It's a 2-story cylindrical building that's hosted at Johnson Space Center. It's smaller than a small flat or apartment for those not in the UK. And there were 4 of us in it for 45 days in my mission. I was part of the Hera 15 crew. We based our logo, which I drew myself, off the Apollo 15 logo, which was really cool.
Awesome.
I actually drew that while I was at the International Astronautical Congress in 2017 in Adelaide, because they said, we want a logo. I'm like, I can draw a logo. So I drew a couple of options, and they liked that one. So I finished it up, and that's what we did. We've got patches and stuff. It's really cool. But the mission itself was 45 days, simulating a 700-day mission to an asteroid. And my favorite part about that was the EVAs. We simulated the EVAs by going into our airlock and putting on a virtual reality headset. So part of the testing, getting ready for the campaign, was to go through the test to see if you get dizzy on virtual reality, which I don't. Virtual reality is just fun. So we did virtual reality for like 2 or 3 hours every other day, sorry. And we did missions out to the asteroid where we docked and left from a virtual surface exploration vehicle, SEV. You can see images of what the mock-ups look like and the prototypes look like on the NASA website. If you look up surface exploration vehicle, they're really cool. I've actually gotten to ride in one in real life. I don't have any pictures of that though. But we did missions out to the asteroid using virtual reality. So headset, controller. This is where video game experience comes in really handy when going into the space industry. You probably didn't know that video games were a valuable skill set.
No, but we certainly do now, and that will be music to a lot of people's ears, I would imagine.
Yes, it will. It's becoming more and more useful of a skill to have. I mean, it's useful in construction even. The engineering firm I worked for, Feezer, before I first got out of school, is a landfill engineering firm. And now, instead of having to learn complicated driving mechanisms for a lot of construction equipment, they hand new people the controller and they take to it, and in like 10 minutes, they know how to operate this heavy machinery because it uses a video game controller, which they've been using since they were kids. Common interface. It's amazing.
That's really, really, really interesting. I never would have thought when I'm at home and I'm having a game of FIFA that one day that could land me on Mars potentially. No, but
yeah.
all jokes aside though, you are right. And that's a really interesting point, especially I think people might think that there's a bit of a gap between, playing a video game and then ultimately being able to control something else. But actually, if you use the same controller, like you say, the amount of links that the brain will make up, that's fascinating.
So Megan, how did you get involved with the Hera mission?
So I got involved with the Hera mission because I randomly Google human spaceflight experiments. Probably not what most people Google randomly, but it served me well. I actually found the link to the NASA bed rest study. The last time I had looked at it, it was over. I clicked on it to see if they were starting another one. And that's when I saw the HERA information. I read it, I applied, and then I told my boss I applied. And I told our CEO, because I was still at Spire at the time. This is early 2017. And my boss, who was our general counsel at the time, was like, okay, just make sure your work is done and let me know if you actually get it. Peter, the CEO, was ecstatic for me. He's known that it's my goal to go to Mars since we met in 2011 at ISU. So was almost more excited about the mission than I was, which was great.
That's the sign of a good boss, to be fair.
Yes. So they were very supportive, and I went through all of the precursors. So you have to fill out an application, then you have to do a physical, get a psych eval, motor skills, things like that. And then I thought I hadn't gotten selected for the October 2017 crew because it was already August, and they said they'd give me 30 days notice. Well, apparently they meant 30 days before we go in, because I found out 3 weeks before I needed to report that I'd been selected. This is while I was at IAC in Adelaide. And my boss had already assumed that, oh, you didn't get this one, it'll be the next one at the earliest, because they were doing one each quarter. And I had to email and go, so I just found out that they want me in Houston. It's like, well, do you have everything set up? I said, almost, but we've got 2 weeks of training too, so it'll be fine. But it was really exciting to be a part of research on how we're going to live in orbit or on another planet. So exciting.
So might sound like a strange question, but when you were in this training, what were you eating? You know, were they giving you space food, or
it's the exact same food? It's the exact same food that they give to the astronauts. In fact, it was made by the NASA's food lab.
Okay.
And there was a nutrition experiment involved. So they prescribed to us what we were supposed to eat each meal, when and where. It was a little bit frustrating because one of my crewmates didn't like their brownies, and I wanted their brownies, but we weren't allowed to trade. I love chocolate. One of the things I want to study is how can we grow chocolate and tea and coffee on Mars.
Interesting.
Yes.
If you have coffee, chocolate, and tea, then to be fair, you're halfway there, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, and sugar, there's a bunch of ways to make sugar from a ton of different plants. So we're set. If we have those three, we're set.
Very true. Okay. And what sort of food was it? You know, I just find it absolutely intriguing. You know, I try to keep close tabs on what I eat here on Earth. So it'd be really interesting to see what sort of food it is that they give you when you're out in space.
They kept very close tabs on what we ate. They actually had barcodes that linked to the nutrition of each item, and they had an app. They gave us an iPad that they'd put some custom applications on, and we would take a picture of the barcode or type in the name and select it off a list if the barcode was too wrinkled or whatever. But it was mainly rehydrated food and food that you just heated up that was vacuum sealed. There were a few exceptions to this. We had candy coated chocolates, which are M&Ms. They're just M&Ms that were repackaged because NASA isn't allowed to use branded packaging for names. Just like the brownies that we had were Little Debbie brownies, only they couldn't call them Little Debbie brownies because they weren't allowed to use that. But they were literally just repackaged Little Debbie brownies, which was good. I like them. However, we were watching the Great British Baking Show. I'm sure you know that show.
Of course we do, yeah.
Yeah.
This is when I started watching the Great British Baking Show. I'd been told I would love it, and yes, I do. But I first started watching it at HERA. And literally, I'm sitting there eating my Little Debbie brownie, watching them make deliciousness. I'm just kind of like, ooh. So that was our mealtime entertainment.
So in terms of when you're on these missions, I guess, is your kind of timetable laid out for you each day? And it's like, you know, you have to do this here, you have to do this now, or from a recreational perspective, is that at set times, or how much time do you have? You were able to paint a picture for us in terms of what a normal day would look like?
Sure. Yeah. So I was part of the sleep study, which made it so much more interesting because it was more of a sleep deprivation study.
Right.
During the weekdays, we're up 19 hours a day. We got at most 5 hours of sleep. I say at most because we're only allowed in our bunk to change or during our sleep hours, which was the 5 hours during the weekdays and 8 hours on weekends. So up 16 hours on weekends. This was a bit of a challenge because I can't fall asleep right away. So I end up getting between 4.5 and 7.5 hours, 7.5 on the weekends, 4.5 on weekdays. So when they would play music to wake us up, they asked us for a playlist of music we wanted to wake up to. And so each of us gave them a number of songs and they played one of them each morning for the 45 days to wake us up. And when we woke up, we were supposed to go downstairs. We had a morning routine, which included daily weight measurements and other measurements, putting on heart monitors and other gadgets that they wanted to test. Because they recorded pretty much, everything, including having us wear a thing that recorded all of the audio around us that we had to turn on and off if we went to the bathroom.
How did you find the whole experience, Megan, for
But
the
it was
45 days?
It was a very rewarding experience. I learned a lot about how I handle that form of isolation. Of course, this year has been, year and a half at this point practically, has been another isolation experiment on a completely different scale. Forced socialization was one of the most challenging parts of the Hera mission because of the sleep study. I couldn't retreat to my bunk and spend some time with just me. I had to always be around the others, although I did start in the evenings after we'd finished our daily routine because they still have to follow federal work hours, which is really funny. So they have to follow all the federal mandates on people employed for the US government on how much they can work you, even though we're in a contained environment at night, like 2 a.m. or something. So I would spend that time doing artwork and watching videos on my iPad because they had Netflix. So I watched 8 seasons of Supernatural in those 45 days. 8 seasons.
What about music?
And did over 50. I had a playlist. So I brought an iPod. I actually had to buy an iPod that was less advanced than what I had been using previously because I needed something that didn't have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth.
Of course.
That was one of the requirements for going in. So I had a playlist, and it's the same playlist I took with me to Africa, my MP3 player, plus a ton of Queen, David Bowie and stuff, which is cool.
Nice. Were they the same songs that you chose to get you out of bed in the mornings?
Actually, there's a few that I picked for the waking up in the morning that weren't on my playlist, just because I thought they would be fun to wake up to. So same playlist. When I wasn't watching things on the iPad, I almost always had my headset in listening to the music. I brought a band that I could strap it to my arm. So I could strap it to my upper arm or put it in my pocket and listen to the music while I did my other tasks.
That's good to hear. I think that would be the hardest thing, I think. If you couldn't have music, then, after a few weeks, that'd be almost impossible, I think.
Yeah, I was able to bring that. It was fine. Yeah, I really learned a lot about how I react to that sort of environment. It was a interesting mission. I really enjoyed working with my fellow mission specialist, Karen. She is the one actually who introduced me to one of my current projects, Project Possum. She'd been involved with them for a while, and she's like, Megan, you have to do this. This is totally you. This is at 2017. I didn't join the program until 2019, but I certainly wanted to.
Is this to do with the spacesuit training?
Yes, this is to do with working with the Final Frontier and doing training in microgravity, high G, all that sort of thing. There are 2 other tools. You'd like to hear them?
Love to, yeah.
So one of them is in 2015. I was building out the UK office, and I volunteered for a rehab mission at the facility, the Mars Desert Research Station in Utah, run by the Mars Society. And while I was there, we built a geodesic dome. We actually have time-lapse footage of it being constructed, which is really cool.
Awesome.
that was great to get to see that habitat and how it works and things, even if it wasn't an actual MDRS mission, though I'm scheduled for one of those in 2023.
What's a MDMS mission?
MDRS, the
MDRS.
Mars Desert Research Station.
Oh, okay,
It's a 6-bed habitat in the Utah desert run by the Mars Society.
Okay. Is that a similar kind of environment to the one that you experienced with NASA?
It will be a much less controlled environment.
Okay.
The mission control won't be on site. The one I was in at NASA was inside a building. This one is just in the desert. It's more isolated because it's out in the middle of nowhere in the desert and we aren't going to have a vehicle. But at the same time, we don't have a lot of things on the outside being fed into the system the way that you would in a space station, because a lot of the procedures at Hera, at the NASA facility, are based on how they do things at the International Space Station, with a few variations to see how they can adapt their current procedures for long duration space flight when there's a time delay. Oh, that was one thing I forgot to mention about Hera. You had asked about the time scheduling.
Yeah.
There were certain tasks that we could shift around so that each weekend I would be able to set aside enough time. I did a block of about 3 or 4 hours. And each weekend I did a watercolor painting, a like 18 by 24 inch watercolor painting. I've got pictures of all of them. I've given a few of them away.
Yeah, amazing. And those watercolor paintings, I guess with the lack of sleep, what was the standard like?
They were actually pretty good. The last one I did was a painting of what our EVA missions were. Because we weren't allowed to keep any of the screenshots we took from inside the simulation or anything, I wanted something to remember it by. So what I did is I painted the actual scene. So a place on the asteroid from the graphical simulation that Karen and I were in, and then added the SEV, which my other two, Adam and Dan, were flying into it. And then I had the habitat in the background. I've got a picture of that. I actually gave the original to the team organizing the mission.
That's awesome.
But back to the Mars Desert Research Station, that was a quick turnaround one. It was a very interesting trip because I flew straight from Glasgow to get picked up to go out there. I was supposed to originally fly to San Francisco first, pick up all my work clothes. Wasn't able to do that, so I hit up Goodwill and Walgreens before heading over because I didn't have work clothes with me in Scotland. I wasn't working on any construction projects.
How long did that mission last?
I think it was 4 days, 3 nights at the Mars Desert Research Station, if I remember correctly. So it was very quick turnaround, and while we were there, we were just fixing up the habitat. It wasn't an actual official mission. I'm scheduled for one of those in the spring of 2023, 2 weeks as the Green Hab officer.
Yes. How many people are involved in that mission?
Including our alternates and people who will be part of the support team. There's 8 of us, I believe.
Fantastic. Well, we'll be watching closely to see how that one goes.
Great.
Did you say that you'd be the Green Hab officer? Did we hear that right? Wow. So what does that entail?
That entails making sure that the greenhouse is operational, that will be taking care of the plants, harvesting any food, running my experiment. I'm hoping to get in touch with some of the people from earlier in the mission and see if they would be willing to start a couple of the things that I wanted to continue. My focus will be on germinating and maintaining luxury crops. So what we were talking about earlier, tea, cocoa, and coffee in a contained environment. So that's what I wanted to do for my Green Hab project.
Absolutely incredible. And then I guess the endeavor is for this to be transferred into space.
Oh, yes, definitely. I'm actually getting ready to start my PhD at the University of Arizona in biosystems engineering, where I'll be working with the Mars Lunar Greenhouse here, which is really cool.
So would you say that, people within the science area to do with plants, to do with animals, could potentially transfer into the technology that would eventually be used in space? Because we have had a lot of amazing. We have had quite a few students that have reached out and said, look, this is what I do. I'd love to know how to get into the space industry. And it's quite difficult to find a direct link. I think there's certain things potentially, but that's really interesting. So how could those students be involved in these sorts of projects?
Well, there's actually a number of projects that they can be involved in right now. And I'm actually hoping to try and get students and professionals in the agriculture industry to help me with some of the things that I'm doing through maybe a citizen science project. There are a couple of citizen science projects involving plants already out there where you can basically duplicate the research being done on the International Space Station at your home or school. But there's also additional research that needs to happen in order for bioregenerative life support systems and things like this to actually work. One of the things that I have noticed, this is my personal opinion, is that we need a database that has things about the growing conditions and everything that's currently nation, et cetera. That all needs to be put into a database. But we also need things like, what is the perspiration to respiration cycle of plants? So how much oxygen do they absorb to how much carbon dioxide do they absorb with oxygen being released? Because I don't know if you know this, but plants at night, they inhale oxygen, exhale carbon dioxide. They don't have lungs, of course.
Only at night?
Only at night, because it's during photosynthesis that they take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen. So we need to know what that rate is for a lot of different plants, because that will have a huge impact on if they're valuable to the life support side of being in a greenhouse for the moon or Mars. That sort of measurement, how quickly they grow. There's a lot of talk right now about allelopathy, which is how do it's known as companion planting in older writing, that is about how some plants get on together and somehow some plants hurt each other if they're planted near each other. And we don't know how that works in hydroponics yet. We don't know how that will reflect as we go into a contained system. Can you actually have those plants in the same system as long as they aren't near each other? As far as animals go, that one's a little more uncertain how it will transmit over. I do think that we will eventually be able to bring animals to the moon, Mars, but it will be a while, I think. Fish, sooner probably, because they're perfectly happy as long as they're in the water.
Yeah,
and they handle microgravity just fine. Animals, it's a bit more of a challenge. Although they're working on 3D printed meat, which is really cool, which would allow us to have a more stable diet without needing to bring the animal with us.
Very interesting. Potentially something that could be used here on Earth as well.
Yep, definitely. In fact, it's being initially used here on Earth. I think there's one company that makes 3D printed hamburgers.
I think I've heard about those guys. There's talk of 3D printed pizzas as well, which would be very upsetting for me because I love making pizzas.
Yeah, that would be interesting. So there's a lot of developments. In fact, 3D printing, I would say, is one of the most important technologies that will enable the expansion into space.
Definitely.
Because bringing spares has always been one of the biggest challenges because of our mass restrictions. If we just need to bring the materials to make spares and the spare parts for the things that make the spares, we reduce the amount of mass required to less than a third.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's the only way to really sustainably manufacture at scale on the different planet, surely. Otherwise, how are you just going to transport everything there? You know, you want to get the 3D printer there to then be able to 3D print there. But I guess we need to nail the 3D printing before we can even think about taking it over there. But it does seem like there's been some fairly big advancements recently in terms of habitats being 3D printed. Am I right?
Yes. I am so excited. NASA just announced their 3D printed habitat. I'm totally going to apply.
Exactly.
I don't know if I'll get in.
I had a feeling you might.
Yes. It's something that I will definitely be applying for. I'm really excited to see that they announced that, and I will be following it. The application isn't open yet. It's another 5 weeks or something before it's open.
Surely you're the perfect candidate for that. Surely. I mean, if we think about a CV.
I hope so.
Or, that surely CVs don't come much stronger for that.
I hope not, because I would love to do it. There is, let's see, what other interesting things in space? Oh, actually, this was actually when I first started at Spire. I forgot to mention it. So when I first started at Spire, shortly after I started, I got the opportunity a friend sent me the link, apply for a spaceflight experiment. And this was at NASTAR's centrifuge. It was simulating the launch and reentry sequences for planned suborbital vehicles. When I got selected, they paid for everything except for me getting there and where I was staying and stuff. So I flew out to Pennsylvania, went to the NASTAR Center. This is back in 2013. There's actually a video for Spire, then called Nano Satisfy, about my mission. One of the Wall Street Journal Startup of the Year competition or whatever. One of our video logs for that was about my mission. And it was literally 3 days where they took you through the training on the centrifuge, which is one of the big parts of astronaut training. So I was really excited to get to do it. And the max G's we pulled were 6 through the chest and 3 down at the same time.
No way.
Yes way.
That's ridiculous. I saw a video, I think it might have been on LinkedIn. There was a guy, he sat on his office chair and he managed to attach a motor to it to do some astronaut training at home, but I'm guessing that's not quite 6 and 3 Gs. maybe 1 and 2.
No, I actually have GoPro footage because I had a mount for the GoPro and I brought a GoPro. We were flying a GoPro on our 3rd satellite. So we had gotten a bunch of GoPro stuff. And I put the GoPro up and it has footage of me during my, you can't really see the footage in this combined one, but in the one where I just get 6 Gs through the chest, because they did it gradually. They did through the chest. So they did 3, and then they did the second time they did 6. I've got footage of that, and you can literally see me being compressed back into the chair, and you can literally see like the skin shifting because of the G forces. It's really freaky looking. But I've got that footage, and it's actually on one of our promotional pieces that we did early on. It was an amazing experience. But that sort of leads me to the other things I've been doing to help train myself with the skills that an astronaut will need. I'm not an astronaut yet. I really want to be, but I hope to eventually become one. I will become one eventually. It's just a matter of when, right?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, you're absolutely right. Mindset is everything. If you truly put your mind to something, you truly believe that you can achieve it, then you really can. And speaking to lots of founders of space businesses, this is the main thing, really. If you have an idea, you just need to really believe in it and you just really need to go for it. So it's amazing to hear that you're of that mindset. So we hope to see you being an astronaut one day. But what would you say are the current activities that you're doing then to really maximize your chances?
One of the things that I am doing, and this is one of the biggest projects that I am involved in, is Project Possum. We're rebranding. It's IIAS, I think. I forget the new acronym. But Project Possum does basically training that simulates what astronaut candidates go through. And we do this in conjunction with Final Frontier Design. So we get to work with spacesuits. The Final Frontier Design has EVA, so extravehicular suits, and IVA, intravehicular suits. Okay. I've mainly worked with the intravehicular suits. I've actually got some really cool photos of the testing that I've done with that. The first thing I did was water testing of suit back in 2019, which was amazing.
What did that entail?
Before you're allowed to do the testing, before you've been allowed to go into the class, you have to have initial scuba training. So I went through the pool portion of the PADI scuba certification, learned how to breathe underwater using the thing. After we did that, we went to Survival Systems, which is a cool facility in Groton, Connecticut. They've actually used it in films and things. It's really cool. We trained with some defense force, was a foreign military group that came in to do their training for what to do if you're in a airplane or helicopter and it ditches into the ocean. So the first thing we had to do was our sea survival training. It's set up like you're in an airplane, and then they say ditching, 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 turn off the lights, and you go into the water and you have to unbuckle, open the door, and get out on the breath that you took as you were ditching.
Oh my God.
Wow.
That is a thing of nightmares.
They start it gradually. They have people down there that have bottles of oxygen to give you if you need them. But the first time they do it, they have the door open. They have the emergency door open. So all you literally need to do is find the opening, undo your belt, and go out. And the next time you have to then open the door, undo the buckle, go out. The third time you have to cross to the other side of the compartment. You have to mimic it. You can't get yours open. You have to go to a different exit. And the fourth one, you have to go to a different exit and open the other exit's door. They do it gradually, but we did it 4 times. And you have to pass all 4 in order to do the actual training course where you use the suits in the water. It was really, really interesting to do. We were simulating a water landing via parachute, and then we simulated a water landing with the Orion capsule. We have a mock-up of the Orion capsule that we used. But the first thing we did was the parachute. They literally strapped you up on risers. They had someone who had actually done parachutes in, I can't remember which war he was in, but he did parachutes and he made sure we were all strapped in properly, got us all harnessed up. They strung us up by the risers and we closed the helmet, we turned on the oxygen, gave a thumbs up, and they dropped us in the water. And we had to get up. And then as soon as we dumped in, the scuba divers they had in the pool with us covered us with the netting from the parachute, covered us with the parachute, like the parachute had come down on top of us when we landed in the water. And we had to get out from under it and into a raft. It was fascinating because one of the things you could do is need to parachute down and then get into a raft.
I believe my mind's just been blown really. I didn't even know that these sorts of programs existed.
Yep.
You know, these are life-changing skills here, all for an incredible course as well. So where would somebody even start to be able to look at one of these courses or to be enrolled?
Project Possum runs a candidate class, usually in the spring and fall. Obviously, last year was all messed up. And after you've done that, you can enroll in any of the other courses. There are, because it's based in the US, there are a few restrictions on who can do what. But in general, it's open to any nationality around the world, as long as it doesn't violate US law.
How long do the classes normally last?
A few days. So a few days to a week, typically. The second set of courses I did, which after the water landing, was the microgravity. Now you don't get to fly in the suit the first time you do the microgravity, which is parabolic flights, which we do with the Canadian Research Organization up in Canada. And the first time you do it, you don't get to fly in the suit because they don't know if you're getting it motion sick and they don't want to have to clean the inside of the suit. So the first time you do it without the suit. And I've got some really cool footage. I actually did an experiment for one of my friends, Erin from MIT, and where we did video of pouring water between 2 things during lunar gravity, because lunar gravity, water behaves so much differently than it does in microgravity and than it does in Earth gravity.
In what way? So I guess, how would you explain it to somebody that...
It kind of goes, it's like this really viscous loop. You know how molasses moves really slow?
Yeah.
Now imagine molasses was bubblier and still moved that slowly, but kind of like moved in lumps, like maybe a really thick pudding will do when it's got lumps in it, where sometimes it just goes bloop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Sounds a bit like when I try to make a sauce at home and I don't make it.
Yes.
You just don't have the patience to get all the bumps out. Yeah,
it feels a bit like that. I've actually got footage of that on my Instagram account. It was really, really cool to do. But we did both microgravity and we did lunar gravity on that flight. We did 9 parabolas, which is really, really amazing.
Awesome. How do people sign up if they're interested in these projects? How do they get on board?
So there is a website. It is, all right, so it's the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences is the new name. Project Possum is one of their projects. And that is astronautics-institute.org. That's where you would go to sign up for any of their courses. And just so you know, we have our first person who's going to be an astronaut going up on a Virgin Galactic flight next year, doing our research. We do a lot of research with the suits and other things. The whole idea behind Possum started with the idea that we want to get measurements of the mesospheric clouds that occur on the poles, which is where the acronym POSSUM comes from. But
Okay,
the
awesome.
vehicles would be the ideal measure those clouds about them. Whenever they appeared, they would reschedule the shuttle missions, for example, but we don't know a whole lot about them. And sounding rockets can do a little bit, but balloons don't go up high enough to get there. It's right below the line into space. So suborbital vehicles are perfect. You can get a minute or two of exposure to the correct area where you can take footage, take samples, things like that. That is one of the areas of research that is what started the whole thing, because they're like, okay, if we're going up in these suborbital vehicles, we're probably going to be in spacesuits. So how do you operate the mechanics while you're in a spacesuit? Well, we should find a spacesuit. They found Final Frontier Design, worked with them, and started doing testing with them on those because they need to better understand the suits and how you can operate in a suit in microgravity. And it all just kind of spiraled from there and has become one of the only ways to get training in the skills that astronauts use outside of, becoming an astronaut.
What I love here is that your whole ambition, your whole endeavor is about sustainability. That really is where your story started. And there's a lot of potential controversy at the moment with the space sector. I'm sure you've seen it as much as we have, with some people not necessarily happy about the fact that there are quite a lot of funds that are being allocated towards space flight, when actually most of the people that are involved in that space flight, and we know this because of the culture of our sector, we feel very lucky to be a part of it. Actually, it's not about that. It is about a bigger picture here. And it is about trying to improve Earth with a lot of space flight. You look at Spire, you look at ISI, you look at these businesses, their whole mission statement is to help to improve Earth. And when you think about this space flight, it's good to hear that there's lots of plans to be using that space flight, not just for tourism, not just for, I guess, financial gain, but also to experiment and to try to see, how can we improve sustainability? How can we try new experiments? How can we help to push our race forward? So it's amazing to hear that. And it's amazing to hear some real stories.
Yep. Well, you just mentioned sustainability, and that's one of the things that I am very, very interested in. Going to Mars, I need to be able to have a sustainable facility on Mars. But what that means is every bit of research done for how can I create a stable, contained biosphere or ecosystem, all of that has relevance here on Earth. In fact, I was looking at what correlations there could be between the research I want to do and Elon Musk's X Prize that he put out for carbon removal, because the two are intrinsically linked. Removing carbon from the atmosphere is one of the key elements of a bioregenerative life support system. So the same thing that we need to do here on Earth, which is remove the greenhouse gases so that we have enough oxygen, we don't have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for us to breathe, is identical to what I need to do on a much smaller scale. I'm hoping with this X Prize and things, that means that there will be more research funding for how do you make this into a broader application, because space is a niche application, yet so many of the technologies developed for space have influenced the entire world. Take baby formula, for example. Did you know baby formula is related to space?
You know what? I had actually heard that somewhere, yeah.
One of the supplements, one of the additive supplements in all baby formulas now was developed by NASA in an attempt to develop a food supplement for astronauts to help prevent the decalcification of the bones on orbit. It didn't end up working out for that, but my goodness, it's good for baby formula.
Absolutely. When you add into that as well, I think there is, I guess, a prestige that you see from lots of companies where they say, this was originally developed by NASA, that then becomes a part of their product. So I really hope that that prestige of space technology being used on Earth, I hope that doesn't end effectively, because
firefighters are safer because of space research. A lot of the work done in the heat shields for Apollo, Mercury, Gemini, and later has been turned into things that can be used to protect firefighters. The newest generation of, it's astounding. The types of things that the offshoots from space research are immense and touch every part of our lives.
They do.
And so many people don't realize GPS is space.
I know.
That one has always boggled my mind. I'm like, you need 4 satellites in communication with your cell phone in order for your GPS chip to work. You knew that, right?
I tell you what, I was thinking just the other day, actually, there's a business now, they're called Link, based in Fallschurch, actually. Basically, their mission statement, again, is to make sure that nobody ever is really in trouble here on Earth again because they couldn't phone for help. So they are effectively finding ways to allow your cell phone to communicate with the satellite. I was literally thinking the other day, there was something in the news about somebody that got trapped. So again, absolutely, like that sort of technology for your everyday person is going to be an absolute game changer.
Oh, yeah. One thing that OneWeb and what's the other ones? Starlink, that both of them are promising is internet connection and or cell service everywhere. If you have an internet connection, you can have a phone number, even if you have no cell service, because of voice over internet protocol. You don't need to have cell service in order to do a phone call. And so much of our lives is about being connected through the internet, especially after this pandemic, or in this pandemic, I should say.
Very true. Yeah, that is very true. And there are a number of companies that are looking to enter into that particular space as well. You know, we see space organizations utilizing their technology to improve Earth like pretty much all the time. And there's so many businesses, especially more on the downstream side of space now. So ultimately the creation of applications from data from space. That's pretty much the main goal, really. I'd say more often than not, that is the endeavor. So it's interesting to hear it from your perspective, which is primarily from the upstream side, as we would call it, of space, and actually physically looking to go into space to help to do experiments to actually help to improve things here on Earth, but also to scratch that itch, as it were, to see what's possible on different planets.
Yes. It sort of goes back to my childhood fascination with the explorers, the people who went out and did new things. One of my inspirations as a kid was Michelangelo. He had ideas for how we could fly way back in the 1600s. Not that they ever came to fruition, but that concept of being good at many things was something that inspired me, that and the explorers. So I've always tried to become the best I can. I know that as a race, humanity is constantly seeking for more, to go new places, learn new things, do new things. And we don't have a frontier right now. The closest thing we have right now is the oceans to a frontier. And there's only so much we can do with the oceans. It's interesting, we actually know more about the surface of Mars than we do about, say, the bottom of the Marianas Trench.
I read that the other day. Yeah, there's they found a new shark, didn't they?
I didn't read about it, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
As long as it isn't the Meg.
It's not the Meg, though. No, but it looked pretty scary. It was like a translucent shark way down deep. So yeah, absolutely right. And you know, it's obviously a very different subject, but there's been these UFO sightings that have been cited by some very reputable people now out in the far parts of the ocean. So again, you know, that just backs it up. There are parts of the ocean that we know nothing about, but then there are parts of planets that we seem to know a lot about.
Yep.
But again, you know, as long as there's people like yourself out there that keep looking for new things, then the world will continue to be a great place for us.
I concur.
Going back to what you mentioned around kind of your inspiration, I think you kind of running through your story today and the research that you've been involved in, I think that's going to inspire a lot of people as well. To kind of ask a bit of $1 million question in terms of kind of your insight. I mean, what advice would you give to anybody wanting to enter new space?
I would say figure out what your passion is, what it is you're good at, and then look at how that can be involved in space. For example, I have my goddaughter is interested in welding. And I was like, welding is awesome. We need welders. Just because you go after a profession that seems very mundane doesn't mean that it's not going to be extremely relevant to the space industry. So if you're good at something and you enjoy it, pursue that and then look at how that can factor into the space industry. Don't just go into something that you're not a good fit for because you think it'll get you into the space industry. That's not the way to go.
Very, very, very wise words. Yeah. And I think just a couple of that, something that you mentioned quite a few times is don't be afraid to do multiple things at once. I think a lot of your success, especially you mentioned when you're going into Spire, was that you'd worked on lots of different things at once and you weren't afraid to pick up new tasks. And I think a lot of the new space companies that we work with, they do need people that can wear different hats. They do need people that can look at different jobs. And I think, provided that people have the passion to enter, like you say, then whether you find your niche or not, just don't be afraid just to give it a try.
Yeah, when I was setting up the UK office for Spire, when I interviewed people for positions like our hiring manager, our head of logistics, our office manager, all of them were a little bit shell-shocked that they had the opportunity to even interview to do space. They're like, but I just do this. Yeah. I just do that. Like, I didn't realize you could go into space for that. Similarly with accountants.
Yeah.
Some of the lawyers that I've spoken with, they're like, we can get into space that way. I'm like, yeah, totally.
Going to be a big demand there, that's for sure.
Oh, a huge demand.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter which part, highly skilled or a trade or what you go into, we will need someone who does that. Because even if you go into, say, construction where you build buildings, you still need to build a launch pad. You still need to build the facilities to house the rocket, to fabricate the parts for the vehicles. You need welders to put them together. You need electricians, HVAC. Do you know how to liquid nitrogen cool a fuel tank? I certainly don't. I know the basics, but I couldn't do it if you asked me to today. I could look it up and give it a go, but someone who specializes in keeping things cool would have a much better chance at understanding it than I would.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think just on your point about the passion, when you get into the industry, that passion is realized, regardless of your job, whether you're in marketing, sales, whatever it is, you do get that opportunity to come into a sector where there's people that are very much open-minded. I think that's the main thing that we found. It is a very accepting area. People are open to ideas. It's a very welcoming culture. So it's almost ironic that people look at it like there's this wall in the way, because surely you have to have skills in this area, or surely, you have to have this and you have to have that. And the reality is that you really don't. You just need to be a good human, and you just need to have lots of passion. Those are the key things. Is that something that you found as well in your involvement in the sector?
I have found it to be a very open and very welcoming community. I have seen a lot of this, and this happens in any community that's fairly small. There's a lot of circular thinking where one group will say this and then they will get positive affirmation and it turns into a cycle. And you need people coming in with different views. So I actually really encourage people who are coming from different backgrounds, different industries, to come in and don't be shy about saying what they think, because there's a lot of thinking that's been circulating around the community for up to decades about how different things could be done. And maybe you have a brilliant new idea of how things could happen. There's no reason not to bring it up. Do your research and make sure it hasn't already been tested, but there's no reason you can't come up with the next big thing in space because you're coming at it from an outside perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. We work with a couple of companies in Germany, and these guys, these are primarily IT type businesses, but it's just that their idea is applicable to space. So one of them is to do with artificial intelligence and machine learning, which is obviously highly applicable to images that come from space, which are vast and they need to be understood as fast as possible. And often machine learning is the best way to do that. And then the other is like a rideshare app. All of this involves the technology from space. So again, there's this big migration in, and there's this big opportunity to leverage the information, the data from space to grow a fascinating business. There's ample opportunity out there at the moment for sure.
There definitely is. And you can come at it from any direction. It's actually one of the things that I highly encourage people to do. If any of your listeners want to get in touch with me, they can. I think you have my contact information. And of course, my name is my website.
It is indeed. Yeah. So it's very hard to miss.
Hard to miss. So
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, thank you very, very much. Thank you for being so open about your story. Thank you for sharing it with us. And we really hope that there's people around the world that can listen to that story and might be able to draw some inspiration and see whether there might be a route into the space industry for themselves. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.